Miller arrived at Eros a half-day before the Rosinante, having spent the trip conversing with a Mormon. He has a contact on the station named Simatimba, a fellow detective who worked with Miller previously despite interdepartmental rivalry. With his help, Miller is able to find the crew of the Rosie and tail them, although Amos spots him because of Miller's hat. The four are suspicious, especially when four people with machine pistols ambush them, but when Miller joins in, they recognize that he's on their side. And afterwards, with an exchange of information, Miller realizes Julie might actually be here. She is, but it's too late. She's dead in the bathroom, with brown liquid pooled around her and filaments jutting from her body. A check of her device reveals something called the Phoebe bug, which feeds on radiation. It's responsible for her condition, hence why she smashed all the lights and display in the room, and gives a set of coordinates. Miller would like to head there with them. His case to find Julie is over. His new case now is to find her murderer. However, leaving is tricky. Simatimba had kept the five of them out of jail over that firefight, but the ship is locked down until he's satisfied that he's not going to get fired by letting them go. But the point is quickly moot, as a radiological leak takes place and everyone is instructed to go to the shelters. Only, as they go, Miller notices a cop wearing gear that doesn't fit him, and he deduces that these cops, the ones Simatimba said were brought in recently from Luna, called CPM, are the criminal scum from series that vanished, and the riot gear they're wearing is the stuff stolen from their station. That suggests all of this was planned ahead of time, that sticking everybody in the shelters is what somebody wanted. So the five plan to instead try to get to the Rosie and escape. Except Miller and Holden can't leave well enough alone, and so they go investigate. Unfortunately, they discover that the people being rescued are actually being infected with the Phoebe bug, and while checking it out, the sick people are hit with a blast of hard radiation, while Miller and Holden are in there, enough to be lethal unless they can get some serious medical help. Thus, the brunt of this portion of the story is about the two main characters meeting up, exchanging information, and finding themselves in a race for their lives. This entire situation allows the two of them to then illustrate more of their differences. For example, Miller had noted earlier as he watched the boys on series strutting in front of the girls, hoping to impress them, that the folly of youth is the belief in one's own immunity to death. You will always be the exception. The universe will always cut you a break. It's usually too late to realize that despite being special to yourself, you are nothing special to an uncaring universe. And yet, as the two are struggling to reach the Rosie before being overcome by radiation sickness, Holden shows that until now, that description applied to him. He always believed he would be the one to dodge the bullet, to get to the escape pod, fly out of the fireball singed but alive. And so far he has. And yet, not only is he on a path to certain death, but it wasn't even an attempt to kill him. It wasn't even an attempt to kill. The radiation was only meant to feed the Phoebe bug. Rather than being in the right place at the right time to make his escape, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and is going to die from a stupid accident. Still, while Holden frequently might seem naive, especially in contrast to Miller, he wasn't ready to just take either Fred or Miller at their word. When Miller wants to join up with them, the rest are unsure because they don't think he has the money that he claims to. And he doesn't, but he does have a plan on how to get it. But Holden is unsure because he has a bad feeling about Miller himself. That's not to say Miller doesn't prove to be of immense help, not the least being saving them from winding up in one of those shelters, but given how Holden and Miller will eventually diverge, it shows from the front that his instincts in reading people aren't as blindly rosy as one might think. What we also see unfold is that both have a different moral center. Holden clearly follows a white knight sense of right and wrong. He doesn't want to compromise on that, whether it's doing the wrong thing or allowing an injustice to go unpunished. Miller, on the other hand, follows a moral code that emphasizes the end result. So long as the only one who's suffering along the way are the morally bankrupt, he can live with that. So that's why, after Miller finishes asking what's happening from a crook that he knows who's posing as a guard, Miller then gut shoots the guy and uses him as a means of getting past the other patrols, while Holden is aghast that Miller has mortally wounded someone who is not a direct threat. Holden draws a line in the sand with Miller. You don't get on my ship if you shoot anyone else without permission. That itself would be a death sentence. Even if he dumped Miller out after curing his radiation sickness, whatever's on this station is going to kill him anyway. But it's likely Holden makes such an ultimatum because he doesn't want to chance Miller endangering his own people. Holden will kill to protect himself and his own, but only as a last resort, not out of expedience. But what makes Miller so useful to Holden is that, as a detective, he's skilled both in police procedures and in handling life and death situations. Miller notes that the ambush at the flop house when they found Julie was improvised. They had to react to Holden and his crew's arrival. And that's why it turned into a firefight. One fool panicked and the rest only began shooting when it was a full-blown engagement. And yet the thing with the criminals and the riot gear was set up months in advance. And from the perp, Miller learns that they'd been setting up all kinds of scientific equipment around the place. Cameras, sensitive instruments, even remotely controlled robots like those used in inhospitable environments. They had been preparing for this situation for far longer than the scopuli had gone missing. Never mind Julie's arrival here. Whatever the Phoebe bug is, he reasons, it's something that they can't study properly in a standard lab. So they've decided to turn Eros itself into a lab with more than 1 million subjects infected. This is confirmed because when the dead begin walking around vomiting infectious brown liquid on people, the security forces don't panic, as would be expected. They must have known, Miller points out, because there's no way they would react to either of these horrifying things with such control, especially in light of the improvised ambush which easily descended into chaos. Miller's insights also allow him to lead Holden safely out by following the crooks who are clearing a path towards their own exit. So as long as the pair don't get too close, the way will most likely be clear to get back to Rosie. Which is good because they barely make it there alive, and Holden is forced to shoot someone with a handgun for the first time. He'd always killed on a scope before, never in person. That will weigh heavily upon him, but the more important thing for the crew will be to keep the two alive. Even the advanced medical system on board, built to patch together Martian Marines, keeps writing the pair off, switching to hospice mode to give them a painless death rather than fighting to keep them alive. The two will suffer some permanent effects from the exposure, and it's not an easy voyage back to health, as you might expect, but the whole thing has given them a chance for some perspective. For Holden, this comes from both within and without. From within, he recognizes the feelings that he has for Naomi, that she is truly beautiful and a good friend, smart and unflinchingly reliable. He wants to, in the wake of confronting his own mortality, not hold back any longer, but say what needs saying while he still has the chance. His realization is very important, since Eros is the Greek god of love. However, Naomi shoots him down. She is, in fact, in love with him. What terrifies her, though, is that Holden has made a long habit of falling in love with and betting the women that he works with. He's a gentleman about it. He never tries to trick anyone into the sack. His feelings are seemingly genuine, so that when it ends amicably. And he's decent enough not to lead someone on, while still treating them with respect. But what worries Naomi is that for Holden, love is for rationalizing away his sexual drive. She's happy to bed him, but doesn't want to do so for the wrong reasons. She doesn't want to sleep with him based on a lie, especially when she is the one for him to fall in love with because she's the only woman and so is loved by default. For Miller, that comes in somewhat the same way, except since Julie is manifest within his mind only now, it is solely from within Miller. Miller is sure by now that he is in love with Julie Mao. And Naomi can see that. She mentions to Holden after they leave the flop house that the girl mattered to Miller, so be careful what they say to him because he's useful, but he's probably in a bad place right now. But for Miller, the relationship in his mind with Julie seems to take on a different form of love than simply wanting to get into her pants. Eros is not only the Greek god of love, it's one of the 4 types of love the ancient Greeks had. And while this type of love is associated often with sex, Plato offered a different interpretation of it, one which led to the interpretation that is therefore called Platonic. What Miller is seeing in Julie Mao is his own humanity, the part that stops him from tumbling into a moral abyss. She's the part of Miller that may have a skewed code of right and wrong, but it's still there. The Mormon on the ship had told them that one day we might become angels, and it is Julie that keeps Miller at least on the side of the angels. Julie is the comfort that he needs in order to endure, the drive to keep him going, and the reins to ensure that he doesn't run wild. As Plato wrote in the Symposium, if man had eyes to see the true beauty, the divine beauty I mean, pure and dear and unalloyed, not clogged with the pollutions of mortality and all the colors and vanities of human life, he will be enabled to bring forth and nourish true virtue.